David Fincher's new film, The Killer, is everything you could possibly want from a David Fincher film, whilst also giving us everything we could possibly want from a Michael Fassbender lead performance. And what do I mean by that? Well, this film is David Fincher doing what David Fincher does best. The film is meticulous, calculated, precise. David Fincher is probably the only director I can think of that makes the phrase cold and calculated somehow incredibly sexy and seductive and captivating to watch. He has such a command of the filmmaking craft at this point. He feels so in control. Everything is so detailed and thought out. It is just kind of a wonder to behold. And then Michael Fassbender does what Michael Fassbender does best, simultaneously being utterly sexy whilst horribly terrifying. I don't know how he does it. It makes my insides feel weird when I look at him because I'm like, that's a sexy man. And he scares me a lot. So the film The Killer focuses on Michael Fassbender, who plays a professional hitman, a killer. He is the titular The Killer. His name is even in the credits, The Killer. That's right. Someone took a page out of Christopher Nolan's film book and was like, ooh, the protagonist. I'll call my character The Killer, the titular The Killer. And we follow him in a kind of a day-to-day life situation of a professional hitman. And we follow the highs and lows of just what it's like to be a professional killer. We follow the mundane, the boring, and the exciting and the thrilling. It does a really interesting job of kind of delving into the psyche of a professional killer. The film really felt to me like the opposite of John Wick. John Wick is fast and sexy and cool, and it's guns all over the place, and it's really over the top and extreme, and this world of assassins feels ridiculous and silly and like a movie. Whereas The Killer and the world of assassins that we delve into in this movie, whilst at times is probably ridiculous, feels very grounded, feels very realistic. I just thought it was a really interesting way to look at something that we've seen so many times before, but in such a kind of slow, patient way. And I think David Fincher's filmmaking kind of elevates this story, because the story itself, like a John Wick, is very simple, very simplistic. There is not much to this plot and the story whatsoever, and I won't really explain anything here because I half saw a trailer, then went, it's David Fincher, I don't need to be sold on it. I'm going to go see this regardless. So I didn't see the trailer properly. I saw a couple of shots, so I essentially knew nothing. So I'm not going to say anything about the actual plot beats or the inciting incident or anything like that. It's following a hitman and some hitman-related shenanigans, but shenanigans is not really the right word. Stuff happens to him and he deals with it like a cold, meticulous, calculated, professional hitman would. And it is incredible. This film is stunning to behold. It is so very, very good. Everything this film sets out to do, I think it achieves. There is one aspect with the narration that I don't think works 100% of the time. There is quite a lot of narration, and sometimes there's a weird kind of feeling of like disconnect where I'm like, I don't think the narration fully feels like it's coming from the guy I'm watching on screen not speaking. In Michael Fassbender, it feels like there's a bit of a disconnect there, and sometimes the narration does work and is interesting, provides insight that we couldn't get without it, but other times it has this really weird feeling that it's like a first draft of like a student film of someone who saw Fight Club and went, oh yeah, I'm gonna comment on society and capitalism and the, the machine that is America, and people look at life and they see good things, but what is there about life that's good? Ooh, I'm artsy, and it comes off very pretentious and weird, like a student film version of a Fight Club, which is super weird because this film was made by the guy who made Fight Club. And at first I'm like, is this going to be like some kind of meta parody of his other films? But then, like, that really is just the first act. The first act has this huge narration monologue moment that just feels very like Try Hard Mr. Robot, Try Hard Fight Club, but it's David Fincher. So I'm like, this must be intentional or just an odd misfire. Maybe it's intentional. I mean, it must be, because the thing about this film that I found so fascinating and interesting was that David Fincher has made a movie in which the main character, every single aspect of his life is detailed and thought out and meticulous and calculated and precise. Every detail of every situation matters, and it has to be overly thought out, and it has to be perfect. Perfection is the key for this assassin to do what this assassin needs to do. And I would say the mindset of the main character, the killer, is the same mindset I would explain and the same words I would use to explain the level of detail with the filmmaking craft. And then I have to go a step further and go, is this some kind of meta biopic about David Fincher? And are we actually not looking into the mindset and the inside mind psychology workings of an assassin, but David Fincher himself? Is this film about filmmaking? Is this one of those films? And I can hear myself, it's sounding pretentious. It sounds like I am also at film school, and I'm doing my first draft of an essay of this film, the way that some of the dialogue feels like a first draft, where you're like, you're almost saying something, but it's coming across a bit. It's fascinating, interesting, and I have to imagine completely intentional. Unless, of course, David Fincher and his mind and his workings isn't how I would imagine they are, but I've seen all his films. They are so hyper, overly meticulous, and the craft of his filmmaking is so detailed to this absurd, intense level. And it just reminded me so much of everything that Michael Fassbender's character has to do and how he operates. And then I look at the film and the way it's edited, the cinematography, the framing, the editing, the direction, every single aspect on the filmmaking level is so precise, and it's so calculated, and it's so measured, and it's so, all those words I've used before and those words, it is just so meticulous. I'm like, this film has to be intentionally some kind of meta biopic about David Fincher's mind and how he makes a film, whilst he's also making a film about a killer whose mindset is the same as him, and it's some kind of snake eating its own tail situation. I think it has to be, right? Or he's unintentionally done this somehow, but that doesn't make sense to me because it's David Fincher. So this has to be what the film is about. I think? Maybe? Who knows? All I know is this film is awesome. It's sleek, it's cool, it's visually interesting. We go through so many different locales and situations. There are some set pieces, particularly the first 30 minutes, that I think are going to become iconic situations of a thing that's doing that thing. And I really do not want to say what it even is, but you'll start the movie and go, oh, it's an assassin doing this kind of thing. And it's got to be the most interesting, iconic version of that I think I've ever seen. It's very, very cool. The film doesn't not have dialogue, but the film has so little dialogue that I think the film really works almost as a mood piece. The atmosphere and the tone and the mood is so intoxicating and captivating, yet there's just this level of dread that keeps building and building and building throughout the whole film that reminds me so much of David Fincher's other work, and it really feels like something that only he can capture in this way. The film, I wouldn't say is slow, but it is patient. It is meticulous. I'm saying the same 6 words again and again because it just feels like they're the best words to describe this film, but it feels so patient in doing what it needs to do, in slowly detailing and building up to these moments that end in crescendos of horrendously brutal violence. There is violence. I mean, the movie's The Killer. It's about a killer. The violence in this movie is shocking, it's brutal, and it's quick. It's fast, it's devastating. Some of the violence in this is very powerful. And except for one sequence, which is like an action fight scene sequence, which is one of the coolest things I've ever seen. It's so like darkly lit, but obviously very intentionally. This isn't some kind of The Long Night Game of Thrones situation where you're like, I can't see what's going on. I feel like they want me to be able to see what's going on. It's just so cleverly lit at night, and it really highlights the brutality and violence, and it's a very extended scene. But apart from that, everything is so brief and shocking and fast, and it hurts. The violence in this film really hurts. It is a very bleak and devastating movie. The world of this assassin is not fun. It's so good. I actually had so much fun with this movie, but fun is not the right word. I was on edge the whole time. I feel like if you take out half of the narration, this film is like an extra star. Like, it's so good. But then part of me is like, that extra narration must be so intentional. Those moments that almost don't work, that come as a weird juxtaposition contrast for like what he's saying in his head to what we're seeing, must be intentional. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe I'm giving David Fincher too much praise, but I feel like everything in this film is so intentional and everything is so detailed that the one aspect that I don't think works, I think must be intentional, and I wonder on a rewatch if that will be something where I go, oh no, I see what this extra layer is actually adding to the film and the character, and potentially David Fincher's mind, and I see what he is going for. I don't know, it's a very, very cool, interesting film, and it is brutal. It is David Fincher doing what he does best. And also you get to look at Michael Fassbender and be like, sexy, sexy man, please don't shoot me.